In the beginning, the emptiness was unsettling. I wasn't sure if I had made the right choice. There were days when doubt crept in, when I questioned if I had thrown away something irreplaceable. I had spent so many years living in the shadow of expectations, shaped by other people's desires, that suddenly standing on my own felt like standing on a ledge, unsure of where the next step would take me. But as time went on, I started to feel it. The weight I had been carrying, their weight, slowly began to lift. The burden of living up to someone else's vision, the constant need for approval, it all faded into the background. And for the first time, I realized something important. I didn't need their empire. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need to be who they thought I should be. I was free. And with that freedom came peace. Not the kind of peace I had expected, not the kind where everything magically falls into place. It was the kind of peace that comes with knowing that I could now build my love from the ground up. The kind of peace that comes when you stop pretending to be someone you're not. I didn't have to be perfect. I didn't have to have all the answers. I just had to be me. There were moments, of course, when I missed the comfort of knowing what my life was supposed to look like, the certainty that came from having a plan, a set path that others had carved out for me. But that certainty wasn't mine. It wasn't real. It was a facade, a mask that kept me trapped in a life that wasn't mine to begin with. And as I stepped into this new chapter, this new life, I felt something I hadn't felt in so long: authenticity. For the first time, I was making decisions for myself. I was choosing what mattered to me, and that felt like more than just freedom. It felt like redemption. It's funny, but in this quiet, uncertain new world I had created, I found a strength I didn't know I had. I realized that peace doesn't come from the things we're afraid to lose. It comes from the strength to let go, to stop holding on to things that weigh us down, things that were never ours to carry. And now, as I look back at the choice I made, I don't regret it. Not one bit, because that peace, it's mine. Let's talk for a moment. If you're watching this, I know you've been through something that shook you to your core. We all have that one moment in life, whether it's a choice, a decision, or a loss, that changes everything. It's the kind of moment that forces you to ask, am I living the life I really want? Or am I just going through the motions, letting someone else decide what's best for me? I've been there, and trust me, I know how hard it is to face the truth, to look at your life and realize that it's not yours. It's someone else's idea of who you should be. But here's the thing: you don't have to keep living that way. You don't have to keep carrying that burden. When I walked away, I didn't just leave my family's empire behind. I left their expectations, their plans for my future, and their idea of what success should look like. I left all of that so I could finally live for me. And yeah, it's been hard. It hasn't been easy to rebuild, to start fresh with nothing but my own two hands. But in doing so, I found something I never had before: freedom. And that's the most powerful thing you can have. Not the wealth, not the title, not the approval. Freedom to make your own decisions, to chase your own dreams, to be your own person. That's the real prize. So, if you've ever felt stuck, if you've ever felt like you don't belong in the life that's been handed to you, I want you to remember one thing: you have the power to change it. You don't have to follow someone else's path. You don't have to stay in a cage that isn't yours. You have the strength to walk away, to take control of your future, and to build a life that truly reflects who you are. And if you've been through that moment of doubt, that moment where you had to choose between the life you were given and the life you want, I want to hear from you. Share your story with me. Tell me how you found the courage to walk away and start fresh. Remember, it's never too late to change, to grow, to become the person you were always meant to be. So hit that like button, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going. Your journey is just beginning, and I'm here for it. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to live up to anyone's expectations. I wasn't trying to prove anything to my family or to the world. I was just living. And in that simple, quiet moment, I realized something. This was what I had been missing. This was the freedom I had been craving all along. I spent the first few weeks rebuilding, not just physically, although, yes, I had to start from scratch in terms of my career and my finances, but emotionally too. I had to rebuild who I was without the weight of their expectations hanging over me. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Every morning, I woke up and felt a little stronger, a little more certain. I realized that I didn't need them to define me. The work wasn't glamorous. I wasn't stepping into some high-powered job with a title that looked good on paper. No, I was doing things the hard way. But every small victory, every task I completed on my own was a step toward the life I wanted. It was mine. There were moments when I doubted myself. Sure, there were times when the quiet seemed too loud and the loneliness too overwhelming. But then I'd remind myself why I'd made this decision. To reclaim my life. To choose who I wanted to be, not who they thought I should be. I started a new project. Something small at first, but it felt good. Every day, I chipped away at it, building something real, something meaningful. And the more I worked, the more I realized how much this meant. This wasn't just about creating a new career. This was about creating a new me. I was finding my way, slowly but surely, and with each passing day, I felt more and more like I was finally alive again. Free to choose my path, free to fail, free to succeed. It was terrifying, sure, but it was also exhilarating. I was building something that was truly mine. Not an empire built by someone else's hands, but a life I could call my own. At first, the silence was golden, the kind of silence that lets you hear your own thoughts, breathe deeply, and just be. I had spent so many years suffocated by my family's expectations, their pressure, their need for me to fit into a mold that wasn't mine. So when I walked away, I thought I'd be free. And for a while, I was. But as the days went on, the silence began to shift. It wasn't just peaceful anymore. It started to feel like a void. The world outside was loud, but inside I felt alone. No one to share the little victories with. No one to laugh with after a long day. No one to remind me that I mattered, that I was doing the right thing. It wasn't the kind of loneliness that comes from being physically alone. It was the kind that eats away at you from the inside, when you realize that even though you've cut all the ties, you still carry the weight of everything you left behind. My family had been everything to me. Even when I was pushing them away, I had always known that they were there, and now they weren't. There were days when I caught myself picking up the phone, thinking I should call someone, just for some kind of connection. But then I'd remember The people I used to turn to weren't the right people for me anymore. The life I had been part of, the life they had created for me, was gone. And as much as I loved it, well, loved it in the way a child loves what they're told to love, I didn't want it anymore. I started to realize that the loneliness wasn't about missing them. Not exactly. It was about missing the version of myself I thought I had to be, the version I was told to be. I missed the comfort of pretending I was happy in a life that wasn't truly mine. And in the quiet, I had to face that. But then something started to change. I began to see that this wasn't a void I had to fill with them. This silence, this space, could be mine. I could fill it with myself, with my dreams, my ambitions, my voice. I didn't need them to define me. I didn't need anyone to validate my choices. It wasn't easy, but slowly I began to embrace the fact that being alone didn't mean being lost. It meant being free. Free to create, free to fail, free to rise again. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of the silence anymore. There's something almost bittersweet about finally letting go. When I walked away from everything, I thought I'd find peace. But peace doesn't come instantly. It's a slow burn, a whisper in the quiet moments, a sigh of relief after carrying something heavy for far too long. I walked out of that room, and for the first time, I was finally free. Free from their expectations, free from the chains that had held me in place. And as I walked away, I realized that no matter what happened next, I had chosen my own path. And that felt more powerful than anything money or legacy could ever offer. The aftermath was even worse than I had imagined. When I walked away from their empire, when I tore up that will, I thought it was the end. But no one told me how far-reaching that choice would be. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the collapse of everything they had built, everything they'd counted on. I thought they would be angry. I thought they would try to convince me. But what happened next was far darker. They didn't just plead with me. They attacked me. The phone calls started the moment I stepped out of that room. Do you realize what you've done? My uncle's voice was tight with fury, the kind of anger I had never heard before. You're throwing away everything. I could hear the desperation in his words, the panic rising in his throat. They needed me, but it wasn't because they cared about me. It wasn't because they wanted to fix things. No, they needed me to save them from the mess they had created. Without me, their empire was on the verge of collapsing. Without me, the wealth would dry up, and all the carefully constructed lies would come crumbling down. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. All I could think about was the years of manipulation, the years of being used as a pawn. And now they were turning on me, blaming me for the very destruction that they had built themselves. The calls kept coming. You don't understand, my aunt's voice pleaded. You're the only one who can fix this. Please, Jordan, please. But how could I fix something that was never meant to be fixed? How could I save something that wasn't mine to begin with? It became clear to me they didn't care about me. They didn't care about my happiness, my well-being, or even my future. They cared about their wealth. They cared about the power they had in this world. And now that it was slipping away, they were scrambling to hold on. I was no longer the son they hoped would take over. I was the one who had broken everything. They didn't know how to cope with that. How could they? For years, they had controlled everything. Their world was built on lies, on keeping their dirty secrets hidden. And now that everything was exposed, they couldn't do anything but lash out. And I was left standing in the middle of it, knowing that I couldn't go back. Not now, not after everything that had happened. I felt sick to my stomach. Part of me wanted to help them. Part of me wanted to fix it, to go back to the world I had known. But deep down, I knew I couldn't. I had already walked away from all of it once, and I wasn't about to walk back into that mess just to make their lives easier. The empire was crumbling. The legacy was slipping away. But for the first time, I realized it wasn't my empire. It was theirs, built on lies and deceit, and it was never going to be mine to save. So I walked away again, this time for good. The moment I tore those papers in half, everything I had known felt like it was falling apart. But there was something about the destruction of it all that felt so liberating. I stood there, holding the remnants of the will in my hands, and for the first time, I felt a quiet sense of control. I wasn't walking away from the family. I wasn't walking away from their legacy. I was walking toward something that was truly mine. It wasn't easy. It wasn't a clean break. There were moments of doubt, moments when I wondered if I had done the right thing. The pressure from my family, the years of expectations, all came crashing back, and I almost caved. I almost went back. But then I remembered, this wasn't just about the money or the power. It was about me. It was about choosing a life where I had the freedom to define myself, to live on my terms, not theirs. I could have stayed. I could have signed the papers, taken the legacy, and walked into the life they had built for me. But at what cost? I wasn't going to let my life be dictated by their empire. And so I walked away. Not out of anger, but out of choice. For the first time, I was free. The first few days after walking away were quiet, almost too quiet. I had expected chaos, confusion, maybe even regret. But instead, I found a strange peace. The kind of peace that comes with finally breaking free from something you thought you had to hold on to. At first, it felt like I was floating in midair, unsure of where I was going or what the next step would be. But as the hours passed, as I stood there in the stillness, something clicked. As I stared at the papers, my heart raced. My finger hovered over the pen, poised to make the decision that could change everything. For a moment, I felt the weight of my family's history pressing down on me. The legacy, the empire, the life they had built, my father's life. I could feel the years of expectations, the pressure to follow in his footsteps, the fear of losing everything that had been handed down to me. But then, there was something else bubbling up inside me, something louder, clearer. Was I really going to follow this path? What would it mean for me to sign? To tie myself to a world I had fought so hard to escape? To become another cog in the machine, another piece in the game of power and control they had created? But if I didn't, what would I be left with? The family would fall apart, the empire would crumble, and I would lose everything they had promised me. I'd be cutting myself off from the life I knew, everything I thought I wanted. But is that enough? Was it really worth sacrificing my own identity, my integrity, just to keep them happy? Could I live with that choice? Could I live with myself? And that's when I knew I had to walk away. The room was still, but inside, everything felt like it was crashing down. I stood there, staring at the papers in front of me, feeling the weight of a decision that was too big for words. The empire, my family's legacy, the wealth, it was all in my hands now. One simple signature, and I could either hold it together or let it fall apart. The irony was too much to ignore. They had built this life on the backs of so many, and now they were begging me to decide whether it would continue. They needed me, but not for who I was, only for what I could give them. I looked down at the papers again, each word a chain that could bind me to a life I no longer wanted. I could almost hear my father's voice, like a whisper in the back of my mind, telling me what I should do, what was expected of me. The man who had built this empire, who had carved out his place in the world with cold ambition, would never have hesitated. He would have signed without a second thought. But I wasn't him. I wasn't built for this world. Not anymore. I didn't want to live in a cage built by someone else's vision. I wanted freedom. I wanted to be the one who decided what my life would look like, not some legacy I had never asked for. As I sat there, the weight of the past pressing on my chest, doubt crept in. Could I really walk away from all of it? Was this decision too big to make in a single moment? Every part of me screamed that I should just sign and make it all go away. But deep down, I knew I couldn't. I couldn't betray myself like that. I couldn't let the past, or the weight of their expectations, control my future. The air felt thick, and I could hear my own breath, shallow and quick. I was trembling, not from fear, but from the gravity of it all. This was more than just a piece of paper. This was my identity, my future, my freedom. And I realized that in this moment, I had the power to choose. There was a part of me that wanted to believe this wasn't about me, that it was about the family. But that was the lie I had been fed my entire life. This wasn't about them. It was about me, and what kind of person I wanted to be. I couldn't sign these papers and continue the cycle. I couldn't be the pawn in their game of power and greed. With each second that ticked by, I knew what I had to do. I couldn't play their game. I couldn't be the good son who followed the rules and kept the empire standing. Not anymore. I stood up. My legs were shaky, my heart pounding in my chest, and for the first time in years, I felt a clarity I hadn't felt before. I wasn't walking away from my family. I was walking toward the person I was meant to be. I didn't need their approval, their legacy, their wealth. I had everything I needed inside me. Without hesitation, I ripped the papers in half. The sound of the paper tearing was like a symbol, a release. Everything I had feared losing, everything I had been told I would need, all of it crumbled in my hands. It felt like freedom. I didn't look back. What happens when the outcast of a wealthy family becomes the only one with the power to decide their fate? Imagine this. You've spent your whole life being overlooked, being dismissed as if you don't matter. You're the one who doesn't fit into the picture, the one who's always been a little different. In my family, that was me. They had a clear vision of what success should look like: money, power, status. And I didn't fit that mold. I wasn't the business-minded son they wanted me to be. I wasn't the one they could count on to carry on their legacy. But then, everything changed. The moment my father passed away, I became the most important person in their world. Not because they loved me, but because they needed me to secure their legacy. Suddenly, I wasn't the outsider anymore. I was the key to their empire. And little did they know, I was about to take everything from them. Growing up, I was always in the shadow of my family's expectations. My father wasn't just successful, he was a powerhouse. His name was everything. He built an empire from nothing, all based on investments, businesses, and wealth. But what he didn't build? A space for me. I wasn't the golden child. I didn't fit into his vision of success. I didn't play the game the way he wanted. My interests, my passions, they weren't about numbers or power. They were about creativity, about following my own path. And he couldn't understand that. I was the one who didn't fit in, always second to the family's perfect image of success. I could never quite meet their expectations. My father's world was cold, calculating, and all about the bottom line. But I didn't want to live in that world. It wasn't me. I didn't want to be defined by their money, by their empire. So I left. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a big emotional goodbye. I just packed up, walked away, and started carving out a life of my own. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but it was the only choice that made sense to me. For once, I felt like I was taking control of my life. But even after I left, something kept nagging at me. Even though I had escaped their grip, I was still tied to them, tied to that legacy, tied to everything I'd grown up with. I couldn't fully shake it off. And then the phone call came. Although I had walked away from that world so many years ago, I never truly felt free. It was as if something always tethered me back. And then the phone call came. When I picked up the phone, my aunt's voice was shaky. "Your father, he's gone." For a few moments, I stood frozen. The world around me felt distant, muted, and all I could hear was the ringing in my ears. I hadn't spoken to him in so long, and yet his death hit me harder than I expected. Not because of the loss itself, but because I realized I had never really left. The pull of my family, of everything they had built, had never fully loosened its grip on me. It wasn't just the death of my father. It was the death of everything I thought I had escaped. Suddenly, I was being pulled back into their world, a world I had fought so hard to leave. The empire he built was still there, looming, waiting for me to return. And that was when I realized everything wasn't over. It was just beginning. I stepped into the house, and everything was just as I remembered. The polished floors, the high ceilings, the expensive artwork. It all felt so perfect, so sterile. It was like stepping into a museum, not a home. I could feel it in the air, the tension. It wasn't love or mourning that filled this place. It was the cold weight of something more calculated, more demanding. Despite the familiar surroundings, I felt like a stranger in my own home. I had left this place years ago, but now, standing in front of them, I knew. I was no longer the son they hoped would inherit the throne. I was a tool they could use to save themselves. There was a strange silence in the room when I walked in, as if they were all waiting for me to do something, to save them. They didn't see me as a son or as family. They saw me as a solution to their crumbling empire. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but it wasn't this. No one offered condolences. No one asked how I felt about my father's passing. It wasn't personal. It was business. "Jordan," my uncle's voice broke through the silence, cold and direct. "We need you to sign something." The words landed like a slap. I felt the weight of them, but not the way I expected. This wasn't a request born from grief. This was about securing the future. This was about me being the key to holding it all together. The realization hit me hard. They weren't asking for my help because they cared. They were asking because I was the only one who could save them. And just like that, I understood. I wasn't walking into a family. I was walking into a corporation, and I was nothing more than a commodity. I picked up the papers and felt an odd chill run down my spine. At first glance, they seemed harmless enough. A standard will, a typical inheritance. But as I began to read through the fine print, a cold realization set in. This wasn't just about the wealth, the assets, or the houses. It was about something much deeper. My father had set things up so that I couldn't simply walk away from this. It wasn't just a legacy. It was a trap. The clauses were written in such a way that everything tied back to the family business, to the empire that had been built on so many shaky foundations. Investments in off-the-books projects, secret holdings in foreign countries, businesses that existed only on paper. Everything was designed to keep the money flowing, to keep the empire alive, no matter the cost. My father's signature was everywhere, a constant reminder that he had built this world with one goal in mind: control. But what struck me the most wasn't the wealth. It was the intricate web of lies and secrecy that held it all together. And now I was being handed the key to that web. I couldn't help but feel trapped. To accept this inheritance, to sign on the dotted line, would mean that I was accepting all of this. The secrets, the lies, the manipulation. It would mean I was agreeing to keep the empire alive, to keep it running just the way it had been, with all its flaws and deceptions. I would be complicit. But what choice did I have? My name was on everything. The family's survival, their future, it all hinged on my signature. The more I read, the more the weight of the decision pressed down on me. Was I ready to take on that responsibility? Could I live with myself knowing what it meant to keep this empire going? And if I didn't sign, what would happen? Would I be the one to destroy everything? For the first time, I felt the real pressure of it all. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about the inheritance. This was about who I was going to be, a part of their world or a break from it. As I kept reading, the sense of unease began to grow. Each line on the paper seemed more like a weight than a simple instruction. The deeper I got, the more it felt like I was pulling back the curtain on a secret I wasn't supposed to see. The empire my father had built wasn't the clean, successful machine I had always thought it was. No, it was a house of cards, built on lies and half-truths. The more I dug into the documents, the clearer it became. There were clauses about offshore accounts, companies hidden under fake names, deals made with people I didn't know in places that didn't sit right with me, investments in things that weren't even legal in some parts of the world. My father, the man I had always looked up to, had built his legacy on the backs of shady deals and unspoken truths. I was stunned. The empire he had built, the one I had once believed to be solid, was a farce. And the worst part? I realized that I wasn't just an observer of this empire. I had been a part of it. I had always assumed I was separate, that I was free from their machinations. But now, sitting in front of these papers, I understood. I had been a pawn in their game all along, too blind to see it. I felt a wave of anger and betrayal rise in my chest. All these years, I thought I was different. I thought I had escaped this world. But now, it seemed like I had never truly left. Even in my absence, I had been tied to this empire. It wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about power. This was about control. My father had set up the will so that the family's future, their empire, would only be sustained if I signed. My signature was the key to keeping it all intact. I could almost hear my father's voice in my head, telling me that this was what I was born to do, to keep it all running. But as I read those words, I couldn't help but feel suffocated. I had never asked for this. I had never wanted to be a part of a world built on secrets and lies. But here I was, faced with a choice I never thought I'd have to make. Should I carry the weight of this legacy, knowing the truth, or should I walk away and let everything crumble?